In 1995, Disney decided the world was ready for a family adventure comedy that took place during the Vietnam War. This movie tells the story of the American military's attempt to replace a village's elephant that had been killed by the Viet Cong, and the thrilling climax involves the parachute drop of said elephant from an airplane. According to the credits, it was inspired by a true story. And watching it with my son in 2024 got me thinking about what other weird or unbelievable things humans have purposely dropped from the air in the past. In the end, my research turned up some pretty interesting examples, which we'll get to in a minute. But it also showed me that the word inspired is the thing that was doing most of the heavy lifting in this movie. To be fair, in 1968, the airdrop of 2 elephants in Vietnam almost did happen. Unfortunately for us, word of the mission got out to the public, which created some understandable backlash with animal rights activists. Thus, the plan to parachute 2 elephants into a Vietnamese lumber operation was changed to instead be a helicopter lift, suspending the large animals on cushioned pallets for the final 65 miles of their journey into the jungle. Now, after both exposing the lie of the mediocre movie Operation Dumbo Drop and all but admitting the clickbait of my beautiful AI-assisted thumbnail, I believe I owe you guys footage of at least one large animal being dropped from the sky. So let's start our list with the incredible true story of the time the US Air Force used bears to test ejection seats. Entering service in 1960, the B-58 was designed to fly nuclear delivery missions at sustained supersonic speeds and an altitude of up to 70,000 feet, which was great for avoiding Soviet interceptors, but not ideal if you needed to leave the aircraft for any reason. To deal with this, a new escape capsule was developed that would protect each crew member during ejection, even at speeds up to Mach 2. Or so they hoped, because until you actually try it, there's really no way to know for sure. After rigorous ground testing, a subsonic ejection with a human in the capsule was conducted in February 1962. Chief Warrant Officer E.J. Murray's flawless test meant the B-58 escape capsule program was now ready to move on to supersonic trials. But the title for first successful supersonic ejection wouldn't be going to any human. Instead, a month after Murray's jump, it was a 2-year-old black bear named Yogi that was launched from the bomber at a height of 35,000 feet and a speed of Mach 1.2. After an 8-minute descent, Yogi landed unharmed in the desert outside Edwards Air Force Base. Testing continued for the next few months, involving several other bears and even a chimpanzee, with one ejection being conducted at twice the speed of sound. While there were some injuries to the animals, all of them survived their jumps. Unfortunately though, they were later euthanized in order to be studied for internal damages. In the end, the bear testing program was considered a success and led to some needed refinements before the entire B-58 fleet was fitted with the escape capsule system. After losing both his legs in a crash in 1931, a young Royal Air Force pilot named Douglas Bader found himself forced into retirement despite demonstrating his abilities to still be able to pilot an aircraft competently with prosthetic legs. Later, as German aggression in Europe increased through the late 30s, Bader made several attempts to rejoin the RAF, finally being cleared as a fighter pilot again in November 1939. Through the Battle of Britain, Douglas Bader proved himself well, and by 1941 he was already heavily decorated with 3 squadrons under his command and 20 confirmed aerial victories. On the 9th of August 1941, during a patrol over the French coast, Bader's Spitfire lost its tail in a suspected collision with a German Bf-109. After jettisoning his canopy, Bader's attempt to bail out was impaired by one of his prosthetic legs, trapping him halfway out of the cockpit. With time quickly running out, Douglas Bader deployed his parachute, which pulled him from the aircraft, but left his right leg behind. Later that day, a German wireless transmission confirmed Bader's capture, stating, "Wing Commander Douglas Bader taken prisoner on 9 August 1941. Lost his right leg while bailing out. Bader requests that a new leg be sent. German permission granted to drop it by parachute. Communicate day and time of delivery by radio. Delivering aircraft will be granted safe conduct." While the RAF was glad for the opportunity to deliver a new leg for its pilot, it was not going to give the Germans the positive publicity a safe passage would create. Instead, Operation Leg was combined with a bombing run on a power station nearby. The replacement prosthetic was packaged in a crate, attached to a parachute, and pushed out the escape hatch of a Blenheim bomber that was participating in the raid. A message was then sent to the enemy informing them of the drop, and the crate was soon retrieved by Luftwaffe personnel. Once Douglas Bader had 2 functioning legs again, he immediately used them for multiple escape attempts. becoming such an annoyance that he was eventually sent to Colditz Castle for the duration of the war. During the 1920s, the Curtiss Candy Company looked to capitalize on the relatively new and exciting emergence of powered flight by having special planes drop Baby Ruth bars and gum from the air. This rain of candy was advertised in the newspapers ahead of time, encouraging kids to watch for the falling treats hanging from rice paper parachutes. While it may seem like a harmless and ingenious advertisement, at least one town had a law against dropping items from planes, and Curtiss pilot Doug Davis ended up being fined $10 after landing his plane in Macon, Georgia. The Baby Ruth candy bombings also have an interesting connection to aviation history. In 1927, 12-year-old Paul Tibbets Jr. convinced his mom, Enola Gay Tibbets, to pay the $1 fee that allowed him to go up with Doug Davis and drop Baby Ruth candy to a crowd attending a race in Florida. This was Paul's first experience in an airplane, and encouraged an interest that would eventually lead to him becoming a pilot in the United States Army Air Corps. Paul would then take his place in history in August 1945 when he piloted the B-29 called Enola Gay to drop the first atomic bomb on Japan. When a funeral home in Dallas, Texas was asked to provide the best casket they had, they selected a 400-pound, $4,000 solid bronze model with white satin lining. By the time it arrived at the Parkland Memorial Hospital, President John F. Kennedy had been dead for less than an hour. To preserve the white interior of the casket, it was quickly lined with plastic, while the president's body was wrapped in linen sheets. Once inside the casket, the president was loaded into Air Force One and flown back to Washington. After arriving at the Bethesda Naval Hospital, it was found that the attempts to protect the casket from damage had been unsuccessful. Kennedy's wounds had been too great, seeping through the makeshift bandages. As a team worked to make the president presentable for the anticipated viewing at the Capitol, a new casket was brought in to replace the soiled bronze one. It was in this second hardwood casket that Kennedy would lie in state, with the lid closed at the First Lady's request. Then, on the 25th of November, the president was buried in the Arlington National Cemetery. For the next 2 years, the original Dallas casket was stored in a vault at the National Archives in Washington. Afraid it would fall into the hands of some morbid collector, the late president's brother, Robert, requested for the bronze coffin to be disposed of at sea. On February 19, 1966, a C-130 left Andrews Air Force Base with the casket aboard. 42 holes were drilled into it, and it was weighed down with 3 80-pound sandbags. Several miles off the coast of Delaware, President Kennedy's first casket was pushed out of the plane. 2 parachutes slowed its fall into the water, allowing it to land without breaking before sinking to a depth of 9,000 feet. Even though it has been a common practice in North America for over 60 years, to most people, seeing live fish drop from an airplane is both an unexpected and confusing sight. While it was not always well regulated or controlled, fish stocking itself dates back to the late 1800s, and in those early days it involved a lot of time and effort. The use of airplanes began in the 1940s, allowing large areas to be covered in minimal time. This old documentary shows trout being taken from hatcheries and dispersed among lakes in Quebec, Canada. And this 2021 video from Utah shows the same methods still in use today, though of course with better choices made about what types of fish, in what numbers, and what locations. Dropped at altitudes between 50 to 150 feet, survival rate for the fish is over 95%, and also the aerial dropping is actually said to be less stressful than the previous methods used to restock remote areas. In a nice contrast with the previous entry, our next weird aerial drop involves releasing one animal in order to kill another. The invasive brown tree snake was introduced to the Pacific island of Guam in the late 40s, most likely through US military transports after World War II. With no natural predator and prey that had never experienced a snake before, the population exploded rapidly. Out of the 18 bird species native to the island in 1950, 7 are now extinct. Brown tree snakes also like to crawl on electrical lines, causing regular power outages on the island. To combat the problem, the US government has turned to an unlikely hero, deployed in an unusual way: mice paratroopers. Laced with acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol, dead mice are now being regularly dropped by air all over the island. Streamers attached to the mice slow their fall and help them catch in trees where they are more likely to be found by the snakes. The small dose of painkillers is fatal for brown tree snakes and has been shown to be effective in the ongoing attempt to control the population. During World War II, restrictions on copper, iron, and brass meant the Steinway Piano Company focused most of its efforts on building troop transport gliders and coffins. But in 1942, it was decided the war effort did need pianos, and the Steinway Victory Vertical was designed to meet that unique challenge. Containing no more than 33 pounds of restricted metals, these relatively lightweight instruments were seen as a way to bring a morale boost to soldiers fighting all over the world. They came in 3 colors: olive, blue, and gray. And in many instances, the crated instruments were delivered by parachute, dropped from B-17 bombers. Unfortunately, while we do have pictures of what the crated pianos looked like before delivery, no video or photographs seem to exist of a piano actually being dropped during the war. Around 500 glorified scarecrows were a key part of the Allies' D-Day operations. The English called them Ruperts, the Americans called them Oscars, and the Germans no doubt called them embarrassing, as the deception diverted several combat units away from the actual landing areas. Just 3 feet tall and made from cloth stuffed with hay and sand, the paratrooper dummies weren't very convincing up close. But from a distance, and when combined with noisemakers that simulated gunfire, it made for a very effective ruse, especially in the dark. In Payette Lake, Idaho, human expansion was starting to create issues with the local beaver population. Thus, in the fall of 1948, Fish and Game officials were given the task of relocating the animals to more rural areas. But since the proposed heavily forested locations had no roads, this meant a transplanting process that involved each beaver being trapped in a box and carried by a mule or horse. It was also a journey that could take multiple days, and one not all the beavers would survive. Thus, it was decided the more humane and cheaper method would be just to push the animals out of an airplane. Using surplus World War II parachutes and specially designed crates, 76 beavers were deployed to new locations in this fashion. The operation was a complete success, suffering only 1 casualty when a beaver managed to open its crate early and jump to its death, a move that no doubt only improved the gene pool of his species. As for the rest of the animals, when conservation officers checked on the relocated beavers a year later, they were found to be alive and healthy, having adapted well to their new homes. Did you know the US military once tried dropping bats from an airplane? For that story and 5 more instances of humans turning animals into weapons, you can click the video that's on your screen right now. This has been another episode of That Happened. My name is Sledge. Thanks for watching.